Today we have a really exciting guest. His name is Chris Sica. You're going to hear about his journey in this episode from St. John's Island, where his parents owned a little restaurant on the island, to getting off the island, and this incredible experience of how he had to turn his life around in high school. Went to University of Richmond, sold books 85 hours a week over summers in college, and then from there he has such a unique experience of going to New York to work for a startup in the financial services arena, to travel in the country, to moving to Austin, Texas with one of his friends, to starting a coding school from scratch, scaling it, selling that business. And then today, he is the chief revenue officer for the Ronin Society, which is a consultancy that works with companies and firms and helps them better manage the other side of their business, not the revenue generation side, but keeping the revenue inside the company and maintaining a good strategy. So anyway, he has just an amazing wealth of knowledge from all these different positions he's held. He has some great little golden nuggets that he shares in this episode that you'll hear. And I think you're going to take away a ton from it. So excited to introduce you to Chris, a good friend of mine. Enjoy the show. Why don't you start by just kind of telling everybody like what Ronin, is it the Ronin Society?
Yep.
Yes. Right.
Weird name.
And it's not a cult. It's not a society that everybody gets to join either.
Nope.
What
Kool-Aid? There's no Kool-Aid involved.
How did you find your way to the company, and what do they do?
I've been in Austin about 7 years now. Mm-hmm. And I came here because me and my best friend Luke Philippos wanted to build an app that was going to basically chop up people's parking lots and their driveways and their yards to sell parking spaces for sports events. So have you ever seen people holding up the signs that are like $10 for a space in my yard before like a UT tailgate or something? Yep. So we wanted to automate that process, and we had hired some developers to build that, and they didn't actually know what they were doing, and that just epically failed. And so we realized, all right, well, we're just going to build it ourselves. And at the time, there was a full-time coding bootcamp here in Austin that was really expensive, and you had to quit your job. And so Luke and I got the bright idea that we would just pay our friend who was a developer to teach classes at night, and we would get to take the classes for free if we could get other people to pay him. And it ended up having a lot of product market fit, and that turned into a big deal and turned into what ended up being the biggest coding boot camp in Texas. So after about 3 years in the building of that business, a couple really interesting things started to happen. I realized that I was no longer the right person to be at the helm of that business. And I was a little bit overwhelmed. I was stressed out. I didn't have the management experience to oversee dozens of employees and to make sure.
This is Austin Coding Academy, right? Yeah,
this is for Austin Coding Academy. And it was clear that we needed to have somebody else at the helm from like a CEO perspective. So we had some failed starts there. We brought somebody in that didn't work out. And that was unfortunate, but eventually we did find the right person, and it ended up being someone internal. So for people that are listening to this that have aspirations of growing within an organization and moving up the ranks, it's absolutely doable. And oftentimes the people that spend the most time in front of customers make really, really good C-suite people, especially in the CEO role. A lot of CEOs come from a sales background, and they generally have to have some finance experience just to manage the P&L and balance sheet. But they oftentimes they're like sales background. They're like the seller of the vision, right, to the whole organization. So our director of academics ended up being that person. We brought him in, and he quickly took the reins and did a really great job of motivating people and getting everyone aligned on the same vision. And at that point, it was time for me to step out of the business, and I didn't know what I wanted to do next. I knew that I'd always loved finance, and I'd always loved the markets. And I also had a soft spot in my heart for business owners. So I found a couple of guys that were looking to invest in businesses by writing, small checks of $25,000 to $100,000 at a time. And they wanted to do it in this really unique way called high resolution financing, which is a Paul Graham term from Y Combinator. But basically, if you ever take a construction loan out, they don't give you the whole chunk of money up front. They give you a little piece of it, and then they come and make sure you actually poured a foundation and didn't gamble it in Vegas.
Yeah, correct. Yes.
But
we are familiar with this.
Right. But venture capitals, you guys are intimately familiar. So venture capital is the opposite, where they tend to just write you a big old check and then hope that you deploy it effectively, which is, it is what it is. But our idea was we were going to do construction loan style financing of these businesses. And we were going to give them, $50,000 to hire a salesperson and give them 6 months of runway and enough money to, have a marketing funnel to support inbound leads or something like that. We were going to do it in these chunks. What we found was that most of the businesses had terrible books. Their accounting was all jacked up. They didn't have any forecasting. They didn't have plans. So if I asked them, what is your net income target for 2020 or 2021? There was no answer usually. And this is primarily businesses that were doing less than 10 or $12 million in revenue. But I found these guys that wanted to do this, and they had already gotten started down the path. And I said, I'll come work for you for free if you'll just teach me what you do. And at the end of a year, I basically interned for them for about a year. And at the end of the year, we had a pretty frank conversation. And I said, I've never really worked somewhere where I didn't own a piece of it. So either that needs to become the case here, or I need to go do something else. And we had great chemistry. So they brought me on, and I'll always be thankful for them for getting me into finance. So that's how I found the Ronin Society. And what we do is we basically help business. Should I shut up for a second? This is a long monologue.
Yeah, well, it's interesting, so I'm just kind of letting you go. But I think why did you get involved in something that has to do with financing when you've spent? I mean, I guess Austin Coding Academy, you did multiple aspects of it, so you got to perceive what was helpful. But even before that, you've spent your whole life in sales prior. I mean, that's been your bread and butter. And then and I know you've always been really good with money, meaning like you've personally been very disciplined and good about saving. And so like your connection to money makes sense. But why did you just decide to go initially just total different? It seems like a totally different direction, right? From
if I'm being totally honest and vulnerable, which I guess is what the audience would want, I grew up without a lot of cash, and that's where the savings mentality came from. And when I ran Austin Coding Academy, we basically bankrupted the school 2 times not bankrupt officially, but there were 2 times where we were illiquid and we had to.
Cash flow was not.
Right.
Yeah.
And I learned that one way to fix things is sales. Sales cures all is a very common phrase, and I still adhere to it. But there are just some things that sales can't cure. And in fact, a lot of businesses, as they grow, growth consumes cash. And what we found, at least at Austin Coding Academy, was we were hamstrung by finances, in that if we grew too quickly, or if we wanted to expand, we couldn't. It would cost too much, because we hadn't structured our fixed costs properly, and we hadn't figured out a way to solve. Yeah, just the way the model was built, it needed to be changed so that we could grow without being hindered by cash flow.
So it's like what the mantra that sales always fix is like the solution for any money issues in a company. It's kind of how I feel like individuals sometimes feel like that the individual that's like the individual salesperson and how they treat their own finances, right? Most salespeople are famous for going like, let me just blow all my money this month, and it's no big deal because I can just work harder and earn more commission next month, right? And it's like this dilemma that a lot of salespeople face is that they, their rationalization for not needing to be good with their money is that they can always make more of it, right?
Yep. And they can always make more of it. I hate when people say that, there's another saying that salespeople are coin operated. I don't know if you've heard that term.
Mm-mm.
I think it's pretty disrespectful. I mean, Jess, my fiance, is a sales manager at a SaaS company here in town, a big tech company. And, so I see a lot of the culture that she's imbued in and what she's learned and gone through in her growth. And yes, some salespeople are very like short term, like I'll get a check and that's cool. But I'm starting to see a shift in the sales culture, at least in the circles I run in, which is that unless you're doing consultative selling and you're using something like the Challenger sale or some other more advanced framework, you're going to get eaten alive. Maybe I'm wrong, but for any kind of like large average contract value or large total contract value, you can't use one-off gimmicky transactional techniques.
Yes.
And if you intend to have any kind of business that generates wealth when you're not on the phone or in an office, you need to have relationships that last so that long-term like lifetime value starts to grow. And you don't get those sales without being more sophisticated in your approach, right?
Yeah. So where did you learn that? So because you and I met through a
transactional situation.
Yeah. So for the listeners, Chris and I met back in 2007, 2006, something like that, right? Like
8, 6,
yeah,
probably 6.
2006. Yeah.
I think it was 6.
You were a Richmond Spider, right? From the was it called University of Richmond?
The University of Richmond. It's very prestigious.
It actually is.
It's the Harvard of the South.
Yeah. You and UVA can compete for that title. And then you were studying biochemistry.
Yeah, biochem. Yep.
And you with wanting to become a doctor.
Yes, good memory.
Surgeon or something. And
colorectal surgeon.
And you're just brilliant at, I mean, you could just crush academics in school, but then you decided, hey, I want to make some money over my summer so I can actually like support my life outside of, academics. And so you signed up to sell books, right?
Door to door.
Yeah. And so we worked with Southwestern Advantage, which is called Southwestern back then. And we didn't sell together that summer, but we met probably on the incentive trip and then stayed connected after that. Right.
Yeah, dude, it was great. So yeah, it's just, life is so cool, man. Cause as long as you just want to keep learning, then you're going to be just fine.
Yeah. Well, how many summers did you put in?
I think it was 7 total, right?
Yeah.
6 on the field and then 1 pseudo summer.
And you've, during this time all the way through undergrad and then really a full-time job, recruited teams, ran sales organizations, temporarily lived with me in the Maryland, DC area. And
that was fun.
And then, and so then you went after that last summer, you said, okay, I want to transition. You traveled like across the whole country with your buddy Luke.
Yeah. We sold everything we had. We actually, there was a quick stop in New York. There was about 2 years in New York after Southwestern. So that's where I started to understand that the quick close, the transactional nature selling stuff wasn't going to work anymore, because I moved to New York, and a buddy of mine had started a fintech company that had initially just been selling advertisements on banner ads and selling those for registered investment advisors. But that arbitrage opportunity closed up really quickly. And so they pivoted into more of like a HubSpot that was SEC compliant for RIAs. And I got my ass handed to me in New York. I'll be honest about that. But what I did learn was when I was selling software to people that were managing billions of dollars, I couldn't just call them and like do some quick name dropping and like close the sale. Like these were the sales cycle was a little longer, and you had to find a champion inside the company. You had to challenge them when they said that what they were doing was already enough and that it was working. You had to pull pain in really creative ways. You had to, demonstrate value over a period of time. It was the first time I had experienced a more than 20-minute sales cycle.
Yeah.
And it was hard to transition. But that's when I learned, like, oh shit, all the things that I learned for all those years that I thought were gospel. If I want to do anything more than make $500 to $1,000 at a time, like that's not going to cut it.
Sure. So what do you think? Because I feel like we do get things from every experience that we have that help us be successful doing what we're doing right now. So what are some of the good takeaways? Like, so I feel like you probably had some really good takeaways from, like, just like all of us did from the School of Hard Knocks.
Yeah, absolutely.
That have helped you really well. And then you've great takeaways from, building a coding academy and a coding school. I mean, so like, what were some of the principles that stuck with you that you learned from the door knocking days?
Yeah, from the door knocking days. Sales is ultimately a numbers game. That is true.
Okay.
I think that same logic can be applied to digital marketing. So learning about, so yeah, okay. So I think I have a good answer for you on that. I am biased in all of my conversations. I am very biased towards revenue generation, and it's a pain point with my partners because I always am like, well, I don't care if we can forecast our gross margin into next year. Like, are we growing sales? Is our product market fit still there, or is it not? And what I learned from Southwestern was you look people in the eye over and over and over again, and you ask them questions, and you find a pain or you find a need, you demonstrate value, you close them, and then you watch their eyes when you tell them the price. And you do that thousands of times. And, I work with a lot of companies in the CPG space and in e-commerce. And the difficulty with those businesses is you're in digital marketing. And so you have to figure out new ways to find out if there's product market fit. But when you direct sell stuff, you can tell very quickly if there's product market fit, and you can see the things that you say that resonate with people and the things that you say that don't. Whereas, so what's the principle? The principle is that when I work with a business, at least to me, it's very clear that the base of all of your decisions should be your customer persona. It should be your customer persona followed by the buyer's journey. So that information should give you the basis of all of your sales scripts, all of your sales enablement marketing materials, all of your product roadmap in terms of new features, what to cut, what not to cut, scope creep, all that crap.
Yeah.
If you know your customer inside and out, and you're constantly attuned to what they need and what they don't need, what their pain points are, if you can speak about them and to them better than they can speak about themselves, you're probably going to do okay in a sales role. And that's what I have learned over time is that, I mean, I used to whip out sales scripts like a machine. Like, I would write sales scripts for people and just dump them on their desk, and it was great. What I've had to learn is that you should spend 80% of your time doing research and learning about your, at least as my experience, learning about your customer, learning about their problems, learning about where they live, what they do, where they digest information, who they talk to, what language they use to discuss a problem that they have.
Yeah.
Like, really just getting into their head, and then 20% of it actually writing.
Yeah. You were, and what's funny is that you were very good at selling books. You actually had really good. I mean, and especially in today's standards, you'd be one of the top top dogs. But I think that's a principle that the people who were really good at that crazy job we did that made us different is that we were naturally curious and really good at asking questions, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that showed up not just in your sales, but it's probably what actually made you a very, very good recruiter and team builder. And that was kind of I felt like if anything, that was your gift that you attached yourself to back then, is that you were really good at recruiting people on a long-term relationship to work with you. And then you cared deeply about them and you were curious about how you could make them better all the time. Right.
Yeah.
And so you had some of the best retention. I mean, these are just things I remember, right? Like you had great people stuck with you. They take a bullet for you. And I think that's almost, it for sure has got to be infinitely more valuable than just, all the experience knocking on doors. But is that that was your probably, I'm guessing, first real like building a group of people to build something bigger than you.
Absolutely.
And then so how did maybe like link that with, so we'll kind of jump over the New York step and say, Austin Coding Academy. I mean, you ended up building that with two of the buddies you met through and really recruited and developed from those days. And you guys had all kind of become peers, but you built that with a few of those guys, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's the cool thing about relationships, right? You never know how they're going to pay off. That's why like Jess and I always have this saying about, so like we never want to go do something. It's so weird. Like we're just homebodies, right? So we always just want to stay, but we have this saying that's stuck with us, which is it's always worth it. So Jess and I always say that to each other because it's always worth it. And it applies to everything. Like it's always worth it to take that call from a rep. It's always worth it to take that call from a friend. It's always worth it to go spend some time helping somebody, even if you don't feel like it. It is always worth it because it's the right thing to do. You feel better. And I've never not gotten back in spades or fold, in whatever you want to say. Like I've never not gotten it back in full.
And I think, while we're talking, I'm trying to find this Benjamin Disraeli quote that I really like. But this is the problem with doing video conferences. I'm like, oh man, I could look on the internet for this great quote that I could bring up on this podcast. So, and then maybe just really quick, like how do you feel like that recruiting muscle has been flexed over the years? I mean, do you feel like that was some of the foundational part, like just learning how to, not recruiting, but like team building and organizational development? Like, do you feel like that's been a muscle that you've used since then?
Yeah, because you if so there's a couple ways to approach it. There's like the deductive and inductive approach to pulling like the most potential out of somebody. Mm-hmm. So when you have this company and you've got a vision for where you want the company to go, if you do a good job of mapping out where you think this business needs to go over the next couple years, you can actually also make a really good, clear org chart of what roles and responsibilities are going to need to exist in order for that thing to accomplish that, right? Which then can be very quickly translated into positions in a company. So if you have a clear org chart with roles and responsibilities delegated to different job titles, then you can do one of two things. You can either train people from within to become those things, or you can hire from without. Mm-hmm. So that's one thing that we do at Ronan all the time. It's part of our management consulting side, which is, really you're either going to have to train the talent or you're going to have to hire the talent. Mm-hmm. And if you're really clear about what's needed in the organization and your employees really well, it's pretty easy to figure out which way you have to go. So regarding relationship building, planting seeds is probably like the most applicable analogy, which is people sometimes don't, everybody sells themselves short, right? So if you give somebody the opportunity to think bigger about what they could become and how they could become bigger as part of your organization, I think that's your job as a manager. So if I'm meeting with somebody that works with me, and I see a lot of potential in them and I see where the business is going, if there's a way to line up what they want and what the business needs so that they can get both of those things it's my job to sell that vision, and it's my job to help lay out steps to get them there. And obviously, like, you can lead a horse to water. So if I lay out that path and I say, does this sound exciting to you? Let me give you everything you need to get there. Whether they take that or not, that's on them. But that's my job as a manager and, of people. It's see what they could become, cut through their garbage, and give them every opportunity in the world to become that thing, and just keep taking a stand for them even when they don't feel it themselves. And then that's about all you can control. Whether they make it or not, that's up to the universe.
So I think from what you're saying, curiosity has been, I feel like if I'm deducing things into like the most basic, it's like what makes Chris good at what he does is being just really curious and good at asking questions and interested in people.
Love it. Yeah. And like, I'm so curious, like I've got 4 textbooks on my desk right now.
Oh yeah. That's the other thing. Like, okay. So real quick, what would have been, what kind of books are you reading right now? Like, I feel like you go like,
I go hard, dude.
I remember phases where you were laying on my couch and I'm pretty sure you were reading the Bible front to back, but then you followed that with maybe another religious text and you went just super deep there. And then, yeah, every time we talk, I feel like you're like going like 3 layers deep into a whole new topic.
Dude, I've got to learn. I don't know what it is, but like my self-worth is very much tied to whether I've learned a new thing or not.
Yeah.
So, obviously I read a lot of finance books. I read a lot of books about financial statement analysis, that sort of thing. But I've also started reading a lot about, I really like frameworks. So lately I've been diving into how McKinsey approaches their management consulting, because they're relatively, they're kind of mysterious, right? And they don't really share too much other than some basic concepts that people have all kind of heard, like MECE and, logic trees and that sort of stuff. So I found a set of books that is written by a McKinsey, an ex-McKinsey guy that talks about their process. And it's a three books. And it's the McKinsey Mind, the McKinsey Way, and the McKinsey something. I forget I haven't read the third one yet. So I've been reading those, and I also have been spending a lot more time in digital marketing. Which
do you like those McKinsey books? I mean, anything are you sucking some good stuff out of them so far?
Yeah. So the thing that I've learned is that it's all frameworks. All everybody's got to sell in consulting is frameworks. And it's not that that's belittling. It's that humans are so bad at staying to a plan. Like, it's like the Mike Tyson quote, everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the face. So that's the idea of a consultant, is it's somebody who's not getting punched in the face by your customer who's pissed off, or a bad review you just got, or the bank who just turned you down, or the investor who just backed out. Like, we don't get punched in the face by that. So you meet with us, we still think it's the same plan. And our job is to exactly what we just talked about employees, which is, you're better than this. Like, this is not a long-term problem. This is a short-term problem. And we still have a long-term plan. So what are we going to do to get back on track? And then obviously, if you're worth your weight in consulting, you tend to have network access. So you tend to have access to other people that can help provide, solutions in times of crisis. And, you generally have a good process that has been proven to help move people down the field.
I'm gonna circle us back to books, because I know you've got some good marketing stuff you're reading right now too. But and I know we're to keep it interesting, we like to just jump all over the place.
Dude, I love it. Let's go.
One thing I really I wanted to make sure we talk about too is just we talked about what you did and being at University of Richmond, but you got a fascinating story even before that. So I always come into some of these calls where I know someone pretty well. Like,
you take for granted all the details, right?
No, yeah, well that and I think I'm coming into this almost preconceived. Like, there's a couple of things that I know about you that I want to make sure like we draw out as to like part of your story. So, okay. And I think one of the things that I feel like has helped you on your path to what you've accomplished. Because I mean, how old were you when you when you started Austin Coding Academy?
20, 29, 28.
Yeah. So for you and me, this may seem normal, but for everybody else listening, Chris went to a really prestigious, esteemed school, decided to knock on doors 85 to 90 hours a week during his summers to save money. That turned into building a sales organization by the time he graduated. That was significant. Then like traveling, going to New York for a couple of years, then traveling rogue the countryside and like reconnecting with himself, and then moving to Austin, Texas, and then just starting this coding school with like money that you honestly had saved up a little, right? Like over that whole time, you're like, well, let's just go ahead and bet it on one thing and see how it turns out. I mean, and the story gets crazier and crazier, and I'll let Chris share that. But I mean, it's something that's odd for most people, and it's just something that only a very, very motivated person would ever decide to I feel like to do all those things, and also someone who is not necessarily afraid of taking risk, right? And so I don't know how you'd consider yourself like motivated or a big risk taker. You might not, compared to what you think you are, but for most people I feel like you're high on that scale. But talk to me about where all that comes from. I mean, you grew up where, and what
I grew up in St. John in the Virgin Islands.
Yeah. So,
and my first job was somewhere around 7 years old. I would go out. So my dad opened a bar called Skinny Legs, and it was named after him and his partner's legs, which were extremely skinny, just like mine are. Adam knows that. So that's really where the name came from. And if you look at the sign on the website, those are my dad's and my dad's business partner's legs holding up the sign. My dad's legs are the ones with the socks up, and my dad's business partner is the one with the socks down. But Skinny Legs, yeah. So look that up. And if you ever go to St. John, talk to Doug Bean, the current owner, and he'll take care of you. But
okay, awesome.
My first job, I was 7 years old, and we had horseshoe pits out in the yard, and I was paid $2 to rake up all the cigarette butts. And that seemed like a great deal for me. So 7-year-old, $2. I bought a lot of candy, and there was a candy store right next to Skinny Legs out in Coral Bay. And I would just spend it all on Crybabies, Warheads, Airheads, and generally liked whatchamacallits, and there's a couple other things. But anyways, I spent all my money on candy. And then after that, I started I did a paper route when I was 9 for about 6 months, and I totally screwed the pooch on that one. I tried to start after that a knife sharpening business where I was going to sharpen knives for all the restaurants on St. John.
What?
And then an older guy actually sniped the position out of me. He took it. He did it out. He took the damn deal. And anyways, he's a good guy. His name's Dan, and I'm glad he took the role. But you could only have one knife sharpener on St. John. There's only 2,000 people there. So he got that. I would have done pretty well at that, I think. So instead, I started moving boxes for my dad because he had a side job unloading CF trailers that landed on St. John. And so I would help him, and he'd give me 25 cents a box for loading up in the truck. So that was a great deal. After that,
how do you and maybe I'm wrong, but like when I think of St. John, I kind of think of partly like what people that I'm friends with from Hawaii say, which is like, and if you grow up on the island, like it's just everybody no one wants to leave. People just want to like hang out. Like it's
most
just
people don't.
Yeah. So most people on St. John's are very content to live on an island and do anything but hard manual labor. Like why are you different?
My parents did a really good job of just selling. I guess they did a good job of selling a vision.
Did they tell you like you need to get off this island and go do something? Like what were they saying to you that?
No. So so we're gonna get real honest here. So I was born with a bunch of birth defects. So I spent the first 10 years of my life in and out of hospitals with a colostomy bag, and I had about 30 corrective surgeries before it was all said and done. And there's pros and cons to an experience like that. The pros, however, are that I basically, the cons were that I was kind of a weird kid and didn't really have a lot of friends. I had some friends, but, brunt of a lot of jokes, that sort of thing. So that obviously is a great source of motivation to prove people wrong and do the whole hero's journey, all that stuff. But the pro of it is that I spent most of my time with adults. And I would sit at the bar at Skinny Legs talking to adults. They'd tell me stories. I'd ask them questions. I'd hang out at my mom's office and talk to the people that came into the office. So there's Skinny Legs. There it is. And the candy store was right on the other side of those stairs. And the fire, see the smoke? That's the smoke coming out from the grill where they cooked all the burgers.
That's so great. I love it.
That's my childhood, man.
That's awesome.
Sorry
to interrupt your flow.
No problem, dude. No problem. So
you're just around adults all the time?
I was around adults, and adults were cool, man. They would ask me a ton of questions, and they would let me ask them a ton of questions, and they would just teach me stuff. And
interesting adults, probably, because you're dealing with not just like you're dealing with the tourists that are coming to the island, right?
We're talking to every tourist that comes in. I'm meeting fighter pilots and ambassadors and teachers and lawyers and doctors and professors. I'm getting to talk to all of these people, and I have a front seat view, whatever you want to call it, because my dad's job was basically to schmooze all the people that came to Skinny's.
Wow.
So I would just walk around and meet people, and that's the cool thing about St. John is it is insulated, but people from all over the world come there. And so you basically get to meet everybody without moving at all. So you get to go across the whole planet without doing anything. So
Wow.
that's a really cool experience that taught me, I don't know, just made me really excited about humans.
It's so interesting, because even though like my story's like very different in a lot of ways, it's very similar in that, not necessarily because it was because I always traveled with my mom, and we'd be like away for a month, right? Because she was singing opera somewhere, and so that just by the nature of it, I couldn't have friends, because you're stuck in a weird place, like, the countryside of Austria, and you're like no one that speaks the same language as you.
Yeah.
And you would end up having to just go wherever my mom went. So I'd go to these dinners or whatever, and I'd just be surrounded by other adults. And so I always thought about that. I think that my comfort level with people like twice my age is much higher than people that are younger
Yes.
than me sometimes.
Yes. I prefer old people.
Yeah. And we both wear old man socks, so that's part of it too. That's good. But no, it's funny that you say that, because I think that maybe it's part of what makes you curious when you're like meeting with adults and you see how they interact, or maybe it's just good influence, or I don't know, but that's interesting.
I don't know. But I guess the thing is, a lot of people just would always tell me like, Chris, you're so smart. Chris, you're so whatever. Chris, you're so blah, 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 blah. And for whatever reason, just hearing that enough, I guess it just kind of gave me a little bit of a oomph to try to like actually fulfill that vision that other people had.
Yeah. This is a really like random weird question, but just since I recently kind of started this coaching program for high school kids, maybe I'm like really interested in how people show up in high school. We don't have to linger on this, but I was just kind of curious for you to like go to, how many kids were in your like graduating class at St. John?
40. It's on St. Thomas, but yeah.
And what's it's called?
So you had to go to St. Thomas for high school.
Got it.
Yeah.
And so like, were you to get into Richmond? Were you like near the top of your class, like, or like pretty good academics? I'm assuming.
I actually was a dumpster fire in high school.
Really?
Yeah, I started getting into trouble in 9th grade, and I ended up getting into a lot of legal trouble in 10th grade.
No kidding.
Was almost kicked out of school. Yeah, that kind of stuff. And I had a rude awakening from the justice system that said, this is your shot to, you got two choices here. So this is actually my favorite story. I was sentenced to community service.
Okay.
For some vandalism that I had done. And and this is going into 10th grade.
Okay.
So they gave me community service, and I ended up having to work at the library. And for the last 2 years before this, I didn't care about school. I thought history was stupid. I was already totally lost in math. I was cooked. I was a cooked goose just waiting for, it's not going to go well for me. Started having fun with outside extracurricular things, so just things weren't going well. And I walked into the library to do this community service, and I was just this like angry little asshole kid. And I met this lady who worked at the library named Rita, and she was just as bitter as I was. And that endeared me to her. And so we would sit behind the desk at the library and we would just make fun of people that came in, because that's all I could do at that time to relate to anybody, was just be mean. And so me and Rita would make fun of people. And then one day she was like, Chris, you're not that stupid. And I was like, what do you mean? She's like, well, do you like to read? And I was like, nah, I don't really like reading. I'm, that whole thing. And she's like, well, I think you should read this book. It's my son's favorite book. And it was this book called Chaos, The Making of a New Science. And it was by this guy named James Glick, who was one of the foundational, people in chaos theory. And I started reading it, and I ended up reading the book in 2.5 days. And it something happened. Something happened when I read that book, and I just devoured. I ended up reading a bunch of Nietzsche. I ended up reading Freud. I ended up reading more James Glick, and I ended up reading some other physics stuff all that summer at the library instead of doing community service. And then I went and I enrolled in nothing but AP classes in 11th and 12th grade and got a 4.0. And then I was able to get a whole semester at college done in high school. And then my guidance counselor called in a favor and got me into Richmond, because I wouldn't have got in without a phone call.
But I mean, talk about a turnaround story too. That's insane.
Crazy. I'm the one example of the justice system working very well.
Look at a transcript that's bombed, and then
4.0,
and they're like, what?
That was what worked. It was like, this is weird. And I wrote my essay about that. It was like, I don't deserve to be here, but I think you should take a bet.
Yeah. Good bet. That's amazing. I didn't even know that story. So, and then let's take all this. So we now have a highly motivated individual with a little bit of a chip on his shoulder. That's a good chip, and really curious about people. And then all these experiences you've had in between. What's kind of the vision of what you want to do going forward with, Ronin Society and also just you personally? How are you blending all this into what kind of the roadmap from here?
Damn, I have to pay you for this therapy.
Well, because I let you. You do always love new things, and even inside of it's the Ronin Society, you're now kind of pivoted over to this part of building their company, right, where you're developing the marketing engine and these systems, and you're loving that, and part of it at least. And,
and that's what I do. I walk into a company and I say, what's the highest and best use of anybody's attention? Let me just go do that thing and turn it into a system that could be handed off to somebody else. That's kind of my thought process. And I'm never an expert, but I know enough about research and about being the scientific method. I use that essentially to come up with a hypothesis for what's needed, and then I build out a system that someone else can take over. That's generally how I approach things.
What's the most interesting thing, keep it really general, that you feel like you've learned in the seat that you're in right now, working with and helping kind of place CFOs and looking at the other side of the business, where you typically were most involved, I feel like, on the sales side, the revenue generating side. Now you're on the margin side and the accounting and the finance side.
Yep.
So what are some of the things that you didn't expect that now that
my favorite, this is easy. Walk into any company and get every person on the leadership team into a room by themselves and ask them, what's the growth story for the next 5 years and how are we going to accomplish it? And you are going to get such disparate answers, it's going to knock your socks off.
Wow.
People are not aligned on a vision. They are not aligned on a plan. People are not good at keeping everybody focused on the same plan. It's just not, it's so hard.
Wow. That's really interesting.
Yeah. Every employee is going to have a different answer. Everybody you ask is going to have a different answer.
Do you feel that that's a major distinguishing factor between companies that are really blowing it out of the water and the ones that aren't, is the singularity of vision and focus?
Yeah, I mean, there are some basic, there are some business models that just lend themselves to scale better than others.
Okay.
But if ceteris paribus, assuming all models were the same and all unit economics were the same, that's the differentiator. And I actually learned that. I think I learned that in Southwestern, actually. Because we did this thing. We had this Sunday meeting where we tied a rope to a car. Did you ever do that one?
Yeah, I think so. Explain it.
And you try. So basically the idea was, you get one person to tie a rope to the front bumper and one person to tie a rope to the back bumper, and you have them just pull like crazy. The amount of force being exerted is the same, but the actual work being done is zero because the car doesn't move.
Yeah.
But then you take both people and you tie them to the front bumper and you have them both go, and obviously the car starts moving. A better analogy, though, in most businesses is there's like 12 people. They've all got a rope tied to the car. One of them is like kind of going out to the left. One of them's going out to the right. One of them's going straight ahead. Hopefully that's your CEO. One of them's going off a little bit to the right. One of them's going off a little bit. And you got this little array of ropes. And the car is moving forward. And so that's why people get confused, because it's hard to see when a car is moving forward that it could be moving forward faster. And so you get everybody aligned on the same vision. All of a sudden the car just starts flying. So ceteris paribus, assuming all the other economics in the business are the same and they're all equally financed and they're all equally banked and capitalized, it just comes down to people. And if everyone's working on the same vision, magic stuff happens. And if they're not, then you just got a bunch of people just doing whatever.
Wow. Love that. That's a great answer. And then maybe another question would be, what do you look for, really quick, what do you look for in an ideal CFO? Like if you're vetting out someone that's going to sit in that seat for a business, like what are the attributes? What do you feel like are the make or break for someone in that position that
For
maybe
CFO,
we don't expect?
CEO, which role?
CFO. I just figured you probably do quite a bit of that. So
yeah, CFO,
or CEO. I mean, I'd be curious as to either, but
yeah, that's a great question. And every organization, let me answer it a different way, because if you look at CFOs across the industry and CEOs across the industry, they vary so much that it would be really hard to put an individual in a box. So what is it's like a common denominator thing. If you zoom out one layer, you will find a common denominator, which is most successful companies tend to have a triumvirate. There's somebody that's in the visionary seat, which tends to be the CEO. There's somebody that's in a finance seat that tends to be the CFO. And then there's somebody that tends to be in the organizational role, which is the COO traditionally. And if you have somebody that's pushing the vision, somebody that's making sure that we've got the resources to get there, and you've got somebody that's making sure that things are getting done on the internal, then that three group of people tend to crush it.
Wow. Yeah. Do you ever see a challenge where maybe because there's two visionaries or two of the two similar patterns that there's a lot of that friction is created?
Yeah. It happens all the time. That was a problem Luke and I had at Austin Coding Academy. We were both CEOs.
Yeah.
And then Luke had to really step into more of a COO role. And it just, it wasn't as fun for him.
Yeah. And then you ended up outsourcing CEO for a minute too, right?
Yeah.
What is that kind of the traditional answer? Like now that you're on the consulting side, like if you have two people, both really talented, but they're clashing because they're both visionaries or they're both, maybe with slightly different visions, like how do you
manage that?
Yeah. Like what are some of the answers to that?
I'm a big fan of the radical honesty. So people don't care. What did Dave Brown always used to say? People don't give a shit what you say until they know that you care or something. There's some way to say that.
Yeah.
People don't care what you know until they know that you care.
Yeah.
So you got to take the time to build enough relationship with them so that you can come out of the gate and say that stuff. If you have a track record of experience that says you know what you're talking about, you can kind of skip that step. But once they trust that you know what you're talking about, I like that frank, candid conversation, which is you got too many chiefs and not enough Indians. You got too many people just trying to drive the vision. And unless you guys can agree on one of you being the person, we're going to continue to have problems here.
Got it. Yeah, that's a good lesson too. We'll do a transcript of this so that we can people can read through it, not just listen through it and find the good stuff.
Cool.
And wrapping up, because I know we just got a couple minutes left. Anything you want to share with the listeners about either who you are and what you do now with the Ronin Society that might be
Yeah.
Something for some small business owners that listen.
Cool. Yeah, I can do that. So, whether it's with us or with another consulting agency, we specialize in working with businesses that do less than $25 million in revenue. We call that the small market as opposed to the middle market, which is generally 25 million in revenue and above. We work with across industries, e-commerce, CPG, food and bev, professional services. What we've found is that until you get to a certain size, all businesses have the same 3 financial statements and they all have the same people problems. So what we do is we come in and we join the management team and we meet with these companies weekly, and we basically help them turn their growth story that they all have into numbers. And then we translate those numbers into financial statements and pro formas. And then we translate those pro formas into a plan on a monthly and annual basis. And then we get everybody in the organization aligned to that plan. And that's our process in a nutshell. So
Yeah.
That's what we do.
I love it. One thing that I've learned from, coaching a lot of professionals and executives myself is that the best in the business almost universally always use outside resources to empower their growth, right? Like they're always students of the game. They're always pulling in outside consultants, coaches, because they're just like you and I. They're very curious. They want to know, and they're not trying to be the expert in everything. They know if they're going to get forward, they got to get somebody on their team.
And at some point, if you have the disposable income, and if you have the disposable income and you have if your time is worth a lot of money, at some point it makes sense to have somebody else lay that path out for you instead of self-studying, right?
And see the blind spots, right? You can see the things they can't by asking some of those questions, like what's your 5-year growth strategy and vision? I love it. This has been awesome, man. We could probably spend 2 hours talking about so much of this stuff because it's so good, and you've had a very fascinating life that's with a lot of little nuggets inside there that we didn't even make it to. But thanks for the time, man. This has been great.
Dude, absolutely. Thank you, Adam. I really appreciate it.
We will have you back, and we'll put the website in the show notes. Anything else that you want in there that we can add?
No, just let them know I'm happy to help in any way that I can, even if it's not in a professional manner.
Yeah. Chris also moonlights as a male stripper, so we'll make sure.
Male stripper,
as well. Yeah.
Among other things.
All right, thanks, buddy. I'll catch you. I got to jump on this other call, man. But this is awesome.
Cool. Have a great day, man.
You too. See you, buddy. Bye.
See ya.